François, sono usciti i primi 2 episodi della nostra nuova serie Mental Coach Factor, sono andati alla grande. Oggi intervalliamo questo spin-off con una puntata di pallavolo.
Sì, è stato veramente un grande successo questo spin-off di Coach Factor, sta piacendo tantissimo. Le prime 2 puntate sono state guardate da un sacco di gente anche al di fuori del mondo della pallavolo, che era un po' anche il nostro obiettivo per aiutare tutti gli sport. Riusciamo a mantenere questi progetti, a farne dei nuovi, a proporvi cose nuove grazie agli abbonamenti e grazie al vostro sostegno. Quindi, come state facendo in tanti, continuate a sostenerci, abbonatevi sia su Spreaker che tramite Patreon, perché per noi veramente è un'energia che utilizziamo per pagarvi poi con dei prodotti sempre nuovi.
Oggi abbiamo come ospite John Forman, che è già stato ospite anche di un webinar con Performance Lab. Una piccola indicazione tecnica: le domande mie e di François saranno in italiano, ma le risposte di John saranno in inglese. Se ascoltate la puntata su YouTube vi sarà sufficiente attivare i sottotitoli, avrete i sottotitoli in diretta per il vostro episodio.
Il webinar che ci ha regalato Forman per Performance Lab è stato veramente interessantissimo, uno di quelli che a me personalmente è piaciuto di più per la chiarezza espositiva, ma soprattutto per le informazioni che ci ha dato. Per questo abbiamo chiesto a John di regalarci un altro episodio per Coach Factor, quindi seguitelo con grande attenzione, perché all'interno della puntata troverete un sacco di indicazioni pratiche ed utili.
Buongiorno e benvenuti a questo episodio di Coach Factor realizzato con la collaborazione di Performance Lab. Proseguiamo la nostra serie di incontri con gli ospiti di livello internazionale. Quest'oggi è con noi John Forman. Hello John.
Hey Joe, how are you?
We are okay.
John attualmente ricopre il ruolo di Talent Strategy Manager e di Indoor Performance Director per la Federazione di Pallavolo Inglese. È anche il direttore tecnico della National Academy e vanta una lunghissima esperienza nei college sia americani sia inglesi. È l'autore di numerose pubblicazioni, in particolare della collana Volleyball Coaching Wizard, che è diventata un bestseller mondiale, e anche dell'ebook The Perfect Drill. Abbiamo ospitato John in un recente webinar su Performance Lab che vi invitiamo ad andare a vedere. Quest'oggi abbiamo deciso di fare un'ulteriore giornata di formazione con lui per parlare di allenamento. In particolare il topic di oggi è 1 week, 3 sessions, 1 focus. Perché abbiamo pensato a questo argomento, François?
Ma perché alla fine è una delle domande che riceviamo più spesso dai nostri ascoltatori negli anni. Alla fine, a livello pratico, devo pianificare una settimana, un settore giovanile, una seniores B1, B2, C, insomma, quello che facciamo praticamente tutte le settimane. Come posso costruire questa settimana? Come devo gestire i tre allenamenti? Quale deve essere l'obiettivo della settimana? Mi permetto di sottolineare il fatto che siamo qui con John perché l'episodio che abbiamo registrato per Performance Lab ci ha lasciato veramente entusiasti, ci ha dato un sacco di informazioni. L'informazione più bella è stata come creare l'esercizio perfetto, e quindi vi rimando a vedere quella bellissima puntata. Insomma, siamo qui insieme a John.
Quindi lasciamo la parola a John per capire come gestire quello che in Italia viene chiamato un microciclo settimanale.
Yeah, I mean, I think I will always start in any kind of planning discussion. I'll always start with what your focus is. And obviously the topic here, 3 sessions, 1 focus, suggests that we already have a focus in mind, which is a good thing, because that's important. We just have to make sure that it's narrow enough and specific enough that we can really work on it intentionally and not be kind of too diversified with what we try to do. And the other thing I would say is, and this might be strange for some people and other people, maybe this is not controversial, but for me, there is no problem with doing the same training session 3 times in a row. Especially for me, as if you're introducing something fairly new to the players, where the first day you're kind of having to explain things to them. So it's probably not going to be very smooth. Second day, there's still a lot of learning going on. And maybe by the day 3, they're starting to kind of really get through it. I think after 3 days, you probably do need to change things up to give them new challenges. But I have no problems, and I've done this myself plenty of times. We've said at the start of the first session, okay, we're going to be working on this. We work on it that day. We do it again the next day, gets a little bit better. Third day gets a little bit better. okay, good. Now let's do it a different way, create new challenges, whatever the case may be. So I don't want coaches out there feeling like they have to do something different every single day just because maybe that's what their coaches before did with them, or they learned that somewhere in a seminar. So that's kind of where I start with this.
John, in Italia c'è un po' l'opinione diffusa che in una settimana suddivisa con tre allenamenti, il primo debba essere dedicato necessariamente alla tecnica individuale. Io non condivido, voglio sapere il tuo parere.
I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And again, it comes back to what I said at the beginning. What is your goal? What are you trying to do? And I can understand in a kind of normal league season time, in the middle of the season, maybe you have a match at the end of the week on the weekend, and you have 3 sessions to prepare. And I definitely know of coaches who will do the individual work early in the week and then go more team as the week progresses. And maybe the last day is all about kind of specifically the team you're going to play. Maybe your B side tries to play like the other team does, kind of as like a scout team or something like that. Other coaches don't necessarily go in that direction. Everybody's obviously going to work a little bit differently. Like I said, for me, it kind of depends on your priority. That approach, we're kind of like, okay, individual work and then we're team throughout the rest of the week, can be fine as kind of a standard framework if you want to work it that way. But if there's something specific that you want to develop in the team, like maybe you need to insert something new into the offense because you're kind of slipping a little bit, or need another option because the defense, the blocking defense on the other side is starting to take away, what you do well. So you have to create more options for the offense. Then break that mold, go in a different direction and say, okay, we're going to spend this week installing this new play, whatever it might happen to be. There's obviously a lot of different things you can do. And you could do the same thing on defense. Maybe you find over your matches that you're not blocking a certain thing very well. Okay, spend the week working on that. You don't have to do specific individual work or follow a specific pattern every single week. And to me, in a certain respect, that could be a bit lazy coaching, whereas you're not taking the time to actually think about what your team needs at that point in the season. You're just kind of going on automatic. And just like we don't want our players going on automatic, we shouldn't do it either.
Qualcosa che faccio fatica a capire è che tutti pensano che all'interno della singola settimana ci debba essere tutto e fatto tutto nella stessa misura. E quindi le tre sedute settimanali sono a lavorare su muro, difesa, attacco e tutto il resto. E un esempio di questo è quando vedo che prima dei riscaldamenti delle partite tutti abbiamo bisogno di ripetere battuta, ricezione, alzata, bug, come se non avessimo fatto nulla durante la settimana.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's important to remember that if you structure things well, and especially if you end up doing a lot of 6v6 or something close to 6v6, you're gonna give the players repetitions on all the skills anyway. And obviously that creates opportunities for them to continue their development, especially if they're doing things intentionally and trying to work on things specific to themselves. You can do that while still working on other things. The players are going to get their reps, and you can still talk to them outside of sessions about the things that they need to work on, while at the same time in the sessions having something specific that you want to get better at, whether it be over that week or, as you say, maybe over a series of weeks because it takes that long to get it done. One of the things that Mark Lebedeau has talked about, and I think you guys probably know who he is that, in his coaching experience, he's come to realize that you do have to continue working on the things that you're good at. So you can't just ignore them altogether because you risk the team kind of maybe losing a bit of identity in doing that. He brought up the example one time when he was coaching in Germany, but how his team was a very good transition team. So block defense into scoring in transition, they were very good, and that was their identity. They struggled in reception, side out. So he decided to spend a lot of time focusing on that to try to get better. And he came to realize that the other part of it fell away. Like suddenly they lost that identity and they struggled in the thing that they were good at. So we can't go completely away from the things that we do well. We still have to work on them, but that doesn't mean they have to become the only thing that we do, or we have to do the same thing all the time, because we do want our team to be better at the end of the season, especially if you're talking about having to go into playoffs or something like that. You need to keep building, and you want your team to be playing at its best at the end of the year. And if you aren't continuously working on getting better over the course of the season, then you're not going to be. And God forbid you have injuries or sickness or something that influences the availability of players at the time, and you may need to bring in the third outside hitter or the second setter or whatever. And if you haven't been working them into all of the things that you're doing as part of that development, then you're going to have a problem.
Una domanda che ci fanno tanti allenatori è come fare con la preparazione atletica quando hai 3 allenamenti, non hai un preparatore e non hai una sala pesi. Allora volevo chiedere a John se può darci qualche consiglio per integrare le 3 sessioni di allenamento con la preparazione atletica, però fatta, diciamo così, in casa.
All right. Well, the first thing I would say is most of your conditioning work should be done through training, through what you do on the volleyball court, by dictating the tempo that you go, because it's very hard to develop that conditioning otherwise. If your team is not used to playing at the speed and for the length of time that you do in a match, you can't train that off the court somewhere, running sprints or in the weight room or anything else that you might do aside from the volleyball. So you do have to be aware of that. And 3 times a week, you should be able to do that just fine. It's harder if, say, you're in a situation where it's only once a week. That's tough. Hard to develop conditioning, one time when you have maybe 2 hours to work with. But 3 times a week, if you control the tempo, because you can raise and lower the tempo that you work at by how quickly the next ball comes in. If you want to do a little bit more conditioning, speed it up. Next ball comes a little faster than it would in a match. If maybe you need to bring them back a little bit, maybe they've worked too much, okay, slow things down, drop the pace a little bit. Matches don't tend to go very fast in terms of tempo. There tends to be a fairly good amount of time between rallies. So we don't have to worry about going super, super fast to get that conditioning effect. We may want to do that at times for conditioning and for other reasons, but we don't need to go crazy. And we do need to recognize that we have to balance that conditioning element tempo with the feedback that the players need to receive through the course of the rallies in between, so they can make the adjustments that they need to make. But it isn't that hard a thing for us to control. Now that's not going to influence things like building strength and explosive power, the things that they have to really do in the weight room. You can use the warm-ups to do some of this stuff that helps prevent injuries in terms of activation and stabilization exercises. For sure, those are things you can build into your warm-ups. You're just not going to develop power sort of things and some of the deeper offsetting imbalances, because a lot of, like, for example, a lot of what we do is forward. So we need to, support in the back, and our hip flexors are a problem because we're always kind of in bent positions and not extended positions. So those are things that have to be done kind of away from the volleyball. But a lot we can do to at least help the players along. You can do through warm-ups and how you tempo your training.
Now andiamo dentro l'argomento. È domenica, dobbiamo preparare la nostra settimana, abbiamo 3 allenamenti. Come facciamo a impostare il lavoro?
All right, so kind of the lead to all this is, where am I in my overall priorities for the season? I presumably at the beginning of the year kind of laid out a map of how I see the team progressing, or how I want the team to progress, and what are the big things that we need to work on, and kind of move down the list. So where am I in there? And then kind of look at that relative to any new information we learned from the last match or the last few matches that might make me have to adjust. All right, so that's going to tell me what I need to work on this week. And it might be continuing what we did last week. As you say, maybe we've got a multi-week program that we're working on to improve our side out performance or something like that. Or maybe we're onto something new. Okay, we adjust and shift focus, and we start building that into the program. So it's kind of like what I talked about last time when we had the discussion about practice planning. Is I'm kind of looking at where do I want to be at the end of this block, and building my way back from there. Now, normally in a practice, I would say, okay, put in the blocks that kind of lead you to that where I want to be at the end of practice. It's not quite as straightforward when you're talking multi-days, because like I said at the beginning, maybe you do the same blocks, 3 days in a row, but they're meant to work you toward where you want to be at the end of that last session. So you're still kind of mapping it from that regard. You're just taking it in terms of each day's progression toward where you want to be. So whether you go with 3 different sessions or 3 similar sessions or some mix in between, the idea is still, okay, I've got where I want to be, for the next match. What are the steps that I need to get there in these sessions that I've got, and laying out for each one of those. Okay, this is going to help me in that direction. And, if it's something really new that we're trying to put in, then like I said, maybe I'm doing the same thing 3 days in a row. If it's just kind of building on prior stuff, then I would probably end up with 3 different sessions. Just saying, and kind of each looks at the last one to adjust. How did we do? Did we get as far as I wanted to go in that last session? All right, can I just kind of continue on? Do we need to do a little bit more in this area, or maybe a little less there and a little bit more in this other area? And so that's where, in that sort of situation, I'm not going to plan each session out, at the beginning of the week. I have a rough idea of what we want to work on, but I'll use each session to inform the next one in the chain. So it's kind of what is the big thing you're working on, and how much time are you going to have to give it overall? Is it new, or is it kind of just progressing what you've got?
Spesso può capitare che in una squadra che ha 3 allenamenti a disposizione non siano presenti all'allenamento 12 giocatrici, per cui ne abbiamo 8, 9 o 10 perché sono infortunate, perché sono indisponibili, perché hanno impegni lavorativi, che può capitare nei livelli intermedi. In questi casi qua, volendo comunque fare fase play in allenamento, secondo te è meglio giocare 4 contro 4, 5 contro 5, o comunque è meglio avere una squadra da 6 e poi dall'altra parte del campo lasciare le restanti 3, 4 e fare dei lavori specifici?
I think ultimately it comes down to what you're working on, and do you need to go 6 on, whatever. I think you can work on a lot of things in small-sided games by just kind of creating scenarios and maybe structuring how you have the court set up and things like that to kind of isolate parts of the game that you're specifically working on. I've been in a lot of situations where maybe I had only 8 players, or like you say, 9 players. And, so say, for example, we have 10 players. We could, as you say, play 4 on 6, or we could play 5 on 5. One of the things that I might do in a 5 on 5 situation is we still play normal, but I might designate part of the court as out of bounds. For example, maybe I don't have enough outside hitters to have one front row and back row at the same time. So if we normally play them in 6, we say 6 is out of bounds. So we play 3 in the front row, 2 in the back row, the libero in the center, with the libero in the opposite. And we don't want players hitting to 6 anyway, usually. So it's kind of good to help them avoid that. Or maybe you don't have a libero, but you do have an outside hitter, so you say cross court. You say 5 is out of bounds. So you can structure things around that as part of what you do. But you might want to create scenarios. For example, maybe you want to work on your outside hitters being more effective using the block. In that case, you could go 4v4 and just have kind of the left side of the court against the right side of the court on the other side. So basically, outside hitter in middle against opposite and middle on the other side, or setter and middle on the other side. So you don't need the whole rest of the court to work on those things. And sometimes in situations like that, you find that things develop that you wouldn't necessarily expect or that you didn't plan. Like, for example, just in playing kind of narrow court, maybe 3v3 or 4v4, if you require having at least 2 front row players all the time, at least 2 players blocking all of the time, then you're going to get a lot more coverage opportunities or recycle opportunities than you would if you let the teams play maybe one blocker up and everybody else plays back, which they tend to like to do for some reason. So those are kind of nice additions that can kind of develop. And it all comes down to just how you set your rules. Do they encourage the things that you're trying to encourage and maybe discourage the things that you're trying to discourage? Or if you don't do it right, it might be the opposite. Discourages the things you want and encourages, I think, I don't know if this was 𝘊𝘢𝑚 as well, but he does a lot of this sort of thing with the rules and playing around with it. And he talked about, you can create bad incentives sometimes. And you kind of have to, because players are always going to find loopholes. They're always going to find a way around your rules to try to win. And so I don't know if he mentioned this or this is something I came up with myself or heard from somebody else, but you could create a situation where, say say you're playing in a game. It doesn't even matter if it's small-sided or not, but if you give the other team a free ball, it's almost guaranteed to be a point. But if you make an error, it's a wash. So it's like earn points only sort of game. Well, if a player's in a situation where he's going to have to give up a free ball, he may decide just to spike the ball in the net or out of bounds so he doesn't give up the automatic point. And then at least they can go to the next rally and have a better chance to win. So these are things you kind of have to think about. You're not going to catch them all. The players are going to figure things out that you didn't think of. But you're going to have to be ready to make adjustments when that happens.
So John, se ci puoi raccontare una seduta d'allenamento, come la costruisci con questa idea di avere 3 allenamenti alla settimana e un obiettivo.
So let's say we want to work on our 𝐵𝐸 in combination with our middle running what could be, I don't know how you guys call it, a shoot, 31, whatever terminology, the fast set away from the setter. So you're needed to develop that. It's not working or something like that. So at the end of the session, you want to be working in a live scenario with the team running that. It doesn't have to necessarily be a normal 6v6. It can be some kind of controlled entry sort of game, or maybe you can force the first ball has to be this play. So you give them a free ball or an easy ball, easy transition ball, or something like that, so that they have to try to do it at least in the first instance of the rally, and then the rally plays out after that. So that could be kind of the final piece that I'm working toward. And then what I would build from there is kind of depending on the players. I might do some skill work with the setters on getting the tempo right for a little bit, just to get them that feel of, okay, this is what we want. Definitely want to be doing that with the middles. Definitely want to be doing that with the outside hitters coming through. So it kind of depends on where they're all at in terms of their development of these things, in terms of how much I'm going to do with them all kind of working together versus working a little bit separately. If it's very early for them and they haven't done these things before, it's probably going to have to be at least a little bit of, okay, this is a kind of individual repetition sort of thing. But I don't want to do a lot of that, because ultimately they have to do it together. So everything has to be worked in combination. So one of the things that I like to do in any kind of tempo work is bring in the delayed replay video, so that the hitters and the setters can see, was I on the right step? Was I up on time? Was the set tempo, the height and speed where it needs to be? I've always found the middles especially really, really enjoy getting that, because it isn't so easy for them to understand sometimes. Was it me? Was it the set? Was it, whatever? So they could see on the video, you were a half step late, something like that. So I would definitely want to do that a bit, and because it's a combination play, you're obviously trying to get to the point where you're working all three of them together off of some sort of live ball situation. Then you can kind of progress the whole thing from broken down to all together to let's get a block in there to ultimately let's get into a game situation. And just where they are in their development just depends on how fast you want to get through that progress.
Molti allenatori allenano in contesti di medio-basso livello, sia per quanto riguarda le ambizioni societarie, sia per quanto riguarda proprio il livello delle giocatrici, per cui ci dicono che hanno difficoltà a riprodurre gli esercizi che noi proponiamo nel podcast, o meglio, che propongono i nostri ospiti. Quindi ti chiedo se hai qualche suggerimento per gestire una settimana di allenamento con squadre di livello, diciamo così, medio-basso.
All right, so the first thing that I always say in these sort of situations is make sure you're not putting artificial limits on your players by saying, oh, they're not good enough, so you don't teach something that they might be entirely capable of learning. And I can use an example. Many years ago, I watched a high school team play in the US. And from watching them, they could have run a fast tempo offense, at least in the middle. But when I talked to the coach afterwards and asked, why don't you do that? Oh, we don't pass well enough. Like, okay, yeah, that's a pretty typical response. The problem with that is you will never pass well enough if you don't give the players a reason to pass well enough. Because if you're not going to run a fast tempo, you don't need to pass well. If all you're going to do is send, meter ball to the middle all the time, the setter can be 3 meters off the net and it's not going to matter. They can still set that ball. You only need precision if you want to run that fast middle set and obviously other things in your offense. So give them that motivation. Introduce the quick set for the middle and let them get excited when it's successful, which motivates them to do it more, which motivates them to understand, okay, if we want to do that more and get excited and have fun, we need to pass our ball. We would receive better or free ball pass better or whatever. So make sure we don't box the players in by saying they're not good enough and not giving the opportunity for them to be good enough. So that's kind of just coach mentality part of it that has to be passed. I think beyond that, and this kind of speaks to what I was just saying, is if you give the players reasons to do things and give them a fun and energy and things that they like succeeding at, then they're going to want to do more of it. They're going to want to get better so they can do that thing. So maybe you bring in video and you show them, higher level volleyball and, kind of get them excited about trying and you let them experiment with things and don't automatically clamp them down when they try something a little different that they saw 𝐿𝐼𝐻 do, or even though they don't have nearly the same athleticism. Maybe they probably will never be able to do it the way 𝐿𝐼𝐻 does it, but maybe they can do something new, something different for them that encourages them to keep developing, and their teammates see that and they want to keep getting better. So while there are definitely drills and games that are probably a little bit more advanced than a lower level team might be able to do because of the limits of their ball control, for example, we can always modify things. So, okay, maybe you don't do the drill exactly the same way Modena does it. Fair enough. That's fine. But can you make the first ball in a little bit easier? Can you limit a few of the options that are in the drill to make it so that your players can do it? They don't have to be successful every single time. You don't want them to be successful every single time. But if they can be successful more times than they aren't, then you're in a good place. And I don't mean a lot more, just, 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, you're in a good place. If it's 3 out of 10, okay, you have to make it a little bit easier. If it's 9 out of 10, okay, make it harder. But just, take whatever you see as a drill and go, all right, how can I change that to reflect my players? And this is it's a classic thing with drills and games is we go to clinics, we see things on YouTube or on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. You go, oh, the champions are using that thing. I need to use it. Well, the champions are using it in a certain way with a certain group of players and other staff and, time and whatever they've got. And your situation is different. So anything that you do has to be a little bit different, at least, than what they do, to reflect who you have, what are the coaches you have available, how many balls do you have, how many ball carts you have to be able to control the flow of the balls around the activity. So it's not a question of they can't do that, they just have to do it differently.
Molti allenatori pensano che ogni giorno bisogna cominciare gli allenamenti dal semplice al difficile, dal facile al complesso, e bisogna ripetere le cose semplici in modo che le sentano, le facciano loro e dopo migliorino. È una cosa che nella vita di tutti i giorni non si fa mai, e quindi chiedo a John se questa cosa è veramente utile o se è solo nella testa di noi allenatori.
I agree. It drives me completely crazy when I go to a training and I watch players do very, very basic things that are so simple that they don't have to use their brains at all. They just go through the motions. If a player's going through the motions, they're not learning. They're not developing. There needs to be stress. There needs to be tension and challenge. Now, do you maybe want to not challenge them on the day before the match or, in serve and pass on the day of the match and you want confidence? Sure. Okay. Then maybe you make it simple and you let them be successful so they have a good mentality going into the match. But if your training is meant to train and make them better, then they have to be challenged all the time, not sometimes. Because if it's sometimes, then you're wasting their time, you're wasting your time. And so this is one of the big things that I see going to clubs and to schools and to wherever is, I watch players, usually especially kind of in the early part of the session, where they're doing ball handling skills and things like that tend to be more individual repetition than team repetition. And it's just so basic that there's no challenge at all. And I understand from a warm-up perspective, you don't want to go crazy. That's fine. And you have to think about their mental load over the course of a session, just as you have to think about their physical load. So you don't want to put a lot of mental strain on them at the beginning of the session if you want them sharp later in the session, making good decisions and all of that. Understood. But if you're doing things that are beyond just warm-up, that are meant to develop their skills, their decision-making, all of that stuff that goes into it, their reading skills, all of these things that we're trying to develop in them, you have to put them in under pressure and make them, basically we're adapting all the time. We're adapting to new stimulus, to new challenges physically and mentally, as long as we keep getting those new challenges. It's when we stop getting those new challenges, we stop adapting and we just go flat and we don't get any better.
Molto bene, siamo arrivati alla fine di questa interessantissima puntata insieme a John Forman. Io vi invito a visitare anche il sito di John, coachingvb.com, dove trovate veramente tantissimi esercizi, tantissimi articoli, tantissimi contenuti creati proprio da John. Come vi dicevamo a inizio puntata, John è stato protagonista anche di un webinar con Performance Lab che tutti gli abbonati possono andare a vedere e vi invitiamo a farlo perché è un webinar davvero straordinario. Che dire, John, grazie ancora e in bocca al lupo.
Thanks, guys. Ciao.
www.coachfactor.it, il primo podcast italiano per allenatori, creato da allenatori.